The jazz man riffs, E-ah, E-double-E, to a transcending Kerouac in constant search for this abstract or certain thing called it. For him, it was Dickinson reaching that inevitable moment of it until the fly buzzes, and Emerson searched for it in the nature and soul of the universe. Sometimes it finds symbolic expression in places like Melville's Whale, Gilman's Yellowy Wallpaper, or Faith in Hawthorne's Young Goodman Brown. Sometimes it is in the production and thing itself, like Jack the Dripper's abstract expressionist, where Pollock must be in my painting to let it come through. But it is never the thing itself. It is not the finger, but where the finger is pointing, not the symbol, but the soulful meaning given to that symbol. Sometimes it is forced upon the tortured soul, innocent soul like Sugar in Bombara's The Lesson, or Huck Finn's confrontation with hypocrisy in his adventures with Tom Sawyer, or a sound heart and a deformed conscience come into collision, and consciousness suffers defeat. At other times, it is a desperate search that must continue, no matter what the end might bring, like the end of Hemingway's double-barreled shotgun. Sometimes people never see it, while other times it slaps them in the face and they still can't recognize it. It remains an underlying theme that the great novelists, essayists, poets, beatniks, creatives, mads, artists, intellectuals, and those who push to move beyond and search for something that attempt to achieve. And that is the challenge of becoming aware, that search for it, our soulful call to arms, and our renewed promise to police with the sociological imagination. We need a sociological police imagination that allows us to become aware of the people we protect and serve. It's the quest for something more that moves beyond the tenets of science. Soulful policing is the search for it, the ability to become aware and find out more about the communities we police. What is their it? And how can we become aware of their awareness? What does the community policing look like from their perspective? What must we replace our we must replace our tired traditional police lenses of an old world long gone with a renewed police imagination that allows us to better understand the constantly changing communities we serve to advance human rights policing. How do the people in communities law enforcement agents serve understand human rights as it applies to policing? How might they perceive the best practices for police to ensure all community members enjoy the human rights that naturally belong to them all? If police officers want to understand their communities from beyond the traditional police lens, they must put on their sociological caps and go into the community, Chicago school sociology style. So welcome to week 9 of human rights policing, getting to know the community Chicago school style. And this week, you're going to be reading chapter 5, with the introduction that I just gave you with soulful policing. Then I talk about 1920s Chicago school sociology getting dirty. Then I talk about my experiences with tongue speakers and so-called religious fanatics in Brownsville, Brooklyn. Then I talk about my work with Down and Out New Orleans, staying in homeless shelters in the city. Then my father writes about sex workers, policing in the city, getting to know the community members. He also writes about his experiences being the platoon commander of the French Quarter, where he's working with the gay business community of the New Orleans French Quarter. And he also had his experiences with his friend and a man I got to know, Phil, the maitre d'. And then we talk about a police officer officer's story in the book where he engages with members of the community on human rights. And so you'll have a discussion board talking about this. You have 2 parts of the discussion board. Again, I keep it limited. You only have to write about 3 of the 6 prompts that are in part 1. So the discussion board has 2 parts. Part 1, 6 prompts. You just got to discuss 3. And that's the first one's reflecting on soulful policing, where I talk about what is this idea of soulful policing. It's all about using that sociological imagination of both understanding the objective structural conditions that cause human suffering, that plague communities, that cause poverty and suicide and depression and drug addiction. What are the objective structural conditions that cause this type of human suffering that lead to anarchy? But that's not good enough to have that sociological imagination. You also have to understand the subjectivity of the people. You have to understand what it's like to live in a world where you're navigating your biography through almost impossible challenges, living in apartheid in places like New York City or New Orleans. What are the subjective experiences, their struggles, their triumphs, their sorrows, and their victories? What is it like to be them, to see the world through their eyes, and to face the structural conditions they face? And that, understanding both of those, the objective social conditions of life and how people experience that subjectivity, that subjectively, that's all about human rights policing. Then I'll talk about 1920 Chicago School. Keep in mind, these were some of the best ethnographic researchers around, of course. A lot of these men from the 1920 school were ripping off the women of the Hull House in Chicago that did the real ethnographic work. People like Annie McLeod that would go into uh, research, working in department stores, taking on one of those jobs to talk about what it's like to be a woman in the 1920s, working these crap jobs in patriarchal America. Same thing, she would go into these industrial warehouses and work these crap jobs for poverty wages, recording what it was like to be a woman working in a factory. And so she did all this ethnographic research to really understand the actor's point of view, what it was like for an individual woman working in these warehouses, in these factories with male bosses. And so I take this idea, or the Chicago school theorists took this idea and they applied it. And they said, if you want to understand social life firsthand, then you don't need to be in any classroom. You need to go out into the classrooms in New York City. Go into the classrooms like my buddy Pierre in places like the Bronx and Manhattan and Brooklyn, and tell me what it's like to be a teacher working in the inner cities. You don't know nothing unless you've been there day after day, hour after hour, week after week, month after month. Same thing, if you want to understand the gangs of New York or gangs of Chicago, you need to become one of them. You need to join them. You need to hang out with them. You need to become part of their worlds. You need to go to their churches. You need to go to their universities. You need to go to their schools. You need to go to their neighborhoods. You need to go to their boxing gyms. In other words, you need to get to see your pants dirty. You don't need to sit inside some classroom reading some book from some boring academic that don't even know what the hell they're talking about. You need to go out and experience social life firsthand yourself, to see the world yourself, develop your own ideas, your own methodologies, your own creativity. And if you don't do that, you don't know what you're talking about when you're writing about other people. Same thing. You want to understand the world of cops, you need to hang out with them. You need to become part of them. You need to go to their communities and go to their churches. You need to go to their establishments. You need to go to their community organizations. You need to spend time with them. You don't know nothing about anybody until you do them things, no matter how many books you read. Then we move on to reimagine policing for the future. How can all of this that we've talked about, getting to understanding the objective conditions of social life that cause human suffering, and then also the subjective conditions that people face, how does this inform a human rights policing? How does this inform what policing should look like? Maybe policing shouldn't be an institution of social control, putting people in cages. That's cruel. Maybe policing should be about protecting the human rights of people, maybe the most vulnerable people in society. Then I ask you some questions about challenges and opportunities. What are the challenges and opportunities associated with implementing this soulful policing, with reimagining this law enforcement, of protecting people's human rights instead of violating them all the time? And then I ask you to give a personal reflection. So talk about your own understanding of policing and your own relationship to human rights. This stuff needs to apply to you too. You live in the community, you live in this world. You live with police and cops and criminals. You understand you're part of this world. What are your ideas? And I hope that y'all think creatively, not just by the book, not just some orthodox kind of thinking. That's boring. Nobody wants to hear that. Can you be creative? Can you be thoughtful? That's what matters. Part 2, the discussion board. That's where I talk about my experience with tongue speakers. And I really give out, how when I went to learn about Afro-Caribbean Brooklyn tongue speakers, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. And so my research question was stupid. Everything I was doing was completely idiotic. It wasn't until I got to know the community. It wasn't until I went to church with them every day, where I go to restaurants with them every day. I go to their houses every day, where I become friends with them and they crying on my shoulder, telling me about their world. And I'm telling them about mine too, exposing my vulnerabilities, because I'm expecting them to show theirs too. Once you're able to do that, then you start learning about people. You start learning about what makes people tick. You start learning something about the human condition. And I did the same thing in other places too, with Down and Out, learning about homeless people and people that make their living on the streets. And my father did the same thing, goes into the police department as a mercenary, basically, but he had that sociological imagination, so he could talk. And he did talk to people, and he learned that those people selling dope on the corner ain't just no scumbags selling dope on the corner, that those people were intricate members of the community, that they went to church, that they went to the university, and they had hope for the future, and they fell in love, and they get good moral lives too. Yet we always just think that they're poor and pathetic. And look at all the criminology and sociology journals out there, just treating poor people like they're poor and pathetic and like they ain't got no agency, but they do. And we deny it from them. And so if we want to understand people, we need to go into their worlds. We need to see how they tick, and we can soon realize that they have a world just as they want to spread their wings just like you do. They got as much creativity and agency as much as we do. And so read my father's stories as well. This is a very smart man who actually took that sociological imagination while doing policing to learn about the people he was policing. So he wasn't just some mercenary from some Latin American country policing a largely Black community here in New Orleans. And so take those stories to heart. Look at my father's perceptions and attitudes and how they changed over time as he became exposed to people that he had never been exposed to before while growing up in Cuba. And then I ask you to talk about some of the challenges with human rights policing and some of the lessons learned with human rights policing in the community. And we have to always realize that it is not the police that determine how a community is going to be policed. It is the community that tells the police or public servants how they want to be policed. And it can never be any other way around. So I hope you enjoy the discussion board this week, and I hope you enjoy the readings as well. Keep up the good work. The midterm progress reports, I gave you extensive feedback on that. I mean, extensive. So I hope you took that to heart. All that feedback that I gave you on those midterm progress reports is intended to help you with your final reports. So make sure you read every word, and please take into consideration all the things and the feedback that I gave you. It was all positive critique, but it's a way for you to improve that final paper. Email for anything you need. Thank you.